Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, does supporting the Syrian revolution necessarily mean backing the rebels? We'll look at who the Free Syrian Army is and why some anti-government activists have become critical of them. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is back from the political conventions. Yay! And she's here, looking out for your live feedback. Malika, I'm looking at Twitter, and it seems that there are some people blaming more than just Bashar al-Assad for the problems in Syria.
You're right, Lisa. A lot of the tweets we're seeing are people blaming outside foreign interference, is what they're calling it. And they're blaming that for the flood of weapons and also for the current state of affairs in Syria. So for those of you at home, if you'd like to join that conversation, tweet us using the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us in the studio is Rafif Jouejati. She is the spokeswoman for the local coordination committees in Syria. She helps organize protests and events designed to empower activists to take action on the ground in Syria. Rafif, welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me.
Remember, you can participate in the conversation in quite a few different ways, actually. But if you want to use more than 140 characters, just go to facebook.com/AJStream and like us.
Hi, I'm Monica, and I work in conflict resolution and after education, and I'm in the stream.
The death toll in Syria now regularly tops 250 people every day, according to reports. As the revolution rumbles into its 18th month, the opposition continues to try to oust President Bashar al-Assad from power. The Free Syrian Army, the fragmented rebel group made up of government military defectors and lightly armed volunteers, has led the offensive against Assad's forces. The FSA has been successful in capturing certain cities and neighborhoods across the country, despite the difficulty they've had scoring weapons, especially as smuggling routes dry up. But as they continue to gain more ground, some of those who initially backed them have become critical of their tactics, as reports surfaced alleging massacres by the group. The video that you're watching now, which we cannot independently verify and has nearly 700,000 views, allegedly depicts an incident that occurred in the town of Aleppo. These are reportedly FSA members escorting bloodied and undressed members of the Berry clan, who some claim had ties to Assad. Alleged members of the FSA would go on to execute the men by gunfire. The rebels continue to have large amounts of support inside and outside of Syria, but are more foreigners joining their ranks? And if so, who exactly has the FSA become? Joining us via Skype from Dubai is Fadi Salam, a Syrian political researcher. Although he works with the opposition, he has been openly critical of the FSA. Also with us is a pro-opposition activist who goes by the name of the 47th. He has requested that we do not identify his location or show his face. Welcome to the stream, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Rafif, I want to start with you. Give us a sense of who the FSA is.
Well, I think we have to separate. There is the true FSA, what we're calling the true FSA, and those are the defected soldiers who refuse to fire on non-violent civilians. They are the people who basically signed their own execution orders in defecting because, as you know, one doesn't simply announce a defection and walks away. So they displayed tremendous courage in standing up for their fellow Syrian citizens. Now, you have additional elements that will routinely take advantage of a chaotic situation, and I believe the Assad regime created that chaos. And so now you have other groups who may be entering the realm, and they have their own agenda that they're trying to pursue at the expense of the Syrian people.
Fadi, in terms of other groups that have entered, is there an element of extremists here trying to hijack the revolution?
Definitely. Firstly, I agree totally with what Rafif said, and this is how the description of the FSA should be. It's primarily a victim of the regime in general. It started as defectors wanting to protect the uprising or protect the demonstrations, the peaceful demonstrations from regimes to brutal attacks. But then it morphed with time. And today, yes, there are external elements, including radicals, including even criminal groups, but in addition to the defectors, which is a small minority today of the FSA, compared to what it was in the beginning. In addition, by the way, to the kids and civilians who carry guns and join the FSA which become the real soldiers, and most of the deaths happening in the FSA happens to these young kids.
Well, the 47th, I'd like to direct a comment to you. We asked a question of our community members on whether or not the FSA has helped or harmed the current situation. Fatima Ansari says, both Assad's forces and the FSA are causing further destruction to the country. Neither of them are resisting. Further destruction, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, to start with, nobody hoped to have the Syrian revolution reach an armed stage. Nobody wanted an armed conflict. The FSA started, just like Rafif said, to protect the demonstrators. Now, whether or not the FSA is helpful or not, to me, I measure it by how many lives they have saved. And in that context, I think they're definitely helpful.
Rafif, I see you shaking your head.
Well, I would agree with the 47th. We have to measure the success of the FSA in terms of the lives they have saved. Certainly, we've heard reports of FSA atrocities. We need to be able to determine which atrocities are actually regime creations, which are regime fabrications, and which are actually groups of bandits committing atrocities. We in the LCC have created a code of conduct, and we have asked FSA battalions to sign. Now, when we started, we had 12 battalions sign on, and today I believe there are more than 35. So you can see that there is a momentum towards operating militarily, certainly in defense of a civilian population, but observing a code of conduct that is based on international laws and the Geneva Conventions.
The 47th, since the beginning of the uprising, the Syrian government has tried to paint the opposition as being dominated by al-Qaeda. Is al-Qaeda working with the resistance?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that the situation in Syria now has created a fertile land for al-Qaeda, to attract al-Qaeda. I don't have the numbers. There was just a report today that says less than 10% of the FSA fighters are foreign combatants. But what I would like to say is that since day one, the Syrian regime has tried to convince the public that it is an armed resistance, there are terrorists and all that. I remember the foreign minister's first press conference last year, where he had to lie and bring footage from Lebanon to prove that they were foreign combatants, when we were just having an overwhelmingly peaceful demonstration when we just started.
Well, speaking of foreign combatants, Ali Glennis says non-Syrian fighters in the FSA may be fighting more for an agenda or an ideology and less for Syria. The 47th, would you admit that there are non-Syrian fighters and actors involved?
Yeah, definitely. There are non-Syrians in the Syria. Well, but I don't like to exaggerate the numbers there. I mean, they're not like what the doctor from Médecins Sans Frontières, he said today, that over 50% of the people he treated are foreign combatants. I mean, that is an outrageous statement, knowing all the reporters that's been on the ground, knowing my people, knowing that there are foreign elements fighting, but the number is a toss-up. Nobody knows the real number. I don't think it's more than 5%. It's even less than 5%.
Rafif, it's been such a fractured rebellion. Why is there this inability to unify under one leader and organize?
Well, we're operating under multiple constraints, but let me just point out that after 50 years of repression, I would say that most Syrians don't want a single leader. We have had single party rule. We don't like it. That's why we're in a revolution. But I will tell you, there are significant constraints in Syria because you cannot organize. You cannot hold a public meeting. You cannot have a public debate on the revolution. To assume that you can would be really naive. I mean, take a look at how people are being massacred simply for waiting in line for bread, let alone political discourse of any kind. So this imposes a very significant constraint on us. Now, I believe we have selected a number of leaders. We do have a reasonably organized opposition inside. We do have debate whether it should be an armed conflict or whether we should stay peaceful. Certainly everybody has an opinion on this. Abroad, the opposition is still rather fragmented, but again, we're having a discourse. There is a dialogue among opposition members, and hopefully very soon we'll be able to come to some sort of resolution and stand in the face of the Assad regime as a political force.
Well, Fadi, I'd actually like to get your thoughts on that. And there's also a tweet here from Inim Syria who says the political opposition can't even coordinate between themselves, let alone between other groups. And that's in response to our question on how much coordination is there between the FSA and the Syrian political opposition. Your thoughts?
That's very accurate. The opposition, the political opposition, is fragmented, but that's even an understatement if you look at the militarized opposition. And that's causing a lot of damage to the Syrian revolution itself, as well as the Syrian state. And the regime is exploiting this and taking advantage of it. So the Free Syrian Army is not a unified group. It's very wrong to refer to it as the Free Syrian Army. It is multiple groups with different ideologies, lacking leadership, and majority of it is not really defectors as in an army. Most of them do not have even training, so they do not understand the structures and hierarchies of military operations or rule of engagement or how to deal with civilians or how to protect civilians even. So in many cases, the existence of the Free Syrian Army in certain areas have caused more suffering because of lack of understanding of how to deal with the situation. In many areas, like for example, take Aleppo or many areas in Idlib as well, the existence of the Free Syrian Army attracts. And this is a lesson the regime wants to teach everybody who's using force. If you use force, we will use even more force than you. So basically, if you locate yourself as a Free Syrian Army group or whatever you call yourself in a civilian area, the regime will definitely brutally try to shell that area, even if you're hiding between civilians. They do not care. So knowing that and accepting this reality again and again and again, for a year and a half, the Free Syrian Army taking steps towards protecting itself by putting itself inside civilian areas, knowingly that the regime will be using this force, is effectively causing more suffering to the population it wants to protect. By the way, many of the civilians will tell you in different areas, the backlash, if you like, in certain areas against the FSA, even among people who sympathize with them, like Salahuddin area in Aleppo, which I was there a few weeks ago. They will tell you that we will cook them dinner, we sympathize with them, but we want them to leave because we know the reaction of the regime. And that's a reality among other areas as well. And as well, I mean, the fact that most of the Syrians within the Free Syrian Army, let alone the external elements, Syrians within the Free Syrian Army mostly have sent their families to either southern Turkey or outside the country. So their families are safe. And that's given the fact that they're protecting themselves by being in civilian areas, have increased the backlash against them. So you protect your families.
Fadi, I think you're raising interesting points there, but I think on the other side, we're still seeing tweets from Muhannad here. It says, without the FSA, there would be at least triple the number of deaths. And Rafif, I want you to weigh in on that. But before you do, there's a video comment. Have a listen.
Hi, my name is Mariam Saleh, and I'm a 20-year-old Syrian American from Tampa. I support the Free Syrian Army because although the costs of militarization in Syria are high, the Assad regime has shown over the last 18 months that it will stop at no amount of force against the Syrian people. The FSA is currently the only option the Syrian people have for liberating the country from the occupying Assad forces and for building a better future for themselves, as the world has left them on their own.
So Mariam echoes a little of what Fadi says, but she says the FSA is the only option.
Well, I think Assad has demonstrated again and again that he's not going to go willingly, nor is he going to abide by any single international agreement he may have agreed to. I recall the Kofi Annan plan, I recall the Arab League plan before that. So this guy is going to have to be removed, presumably by military force. Now, I hear what Fadi is saying, and to some extent I agree with that, but keep in mind, the FSA is primarily composed of defected soldiers, as far as I know, and those battalions that have signed the Code of Conduct are receiving training. They are learning what it means to have human rights. They are learning what it means to take prisoners of war, and I believe they are implementing what they're learning. To Fadi's point, no Syrian soldier was ever schooled in human rights. That's simply not the way the regime works. Human rights is a joke to the Assad regime. So those defected soldiers initially had as much education as they were given. That they are seeking additional training and that they are willing to sign up to a code of conduct, to me, I think is very, very positive.
The 47th, I want to give you a chance to respond to all of this, so please weigh in.
All right, well, I would like to start by saying that Assad started attacking peaceful demonstrations in Homs way before the revolution was armed. And it's a natural response for people to pick up arms and fight against Assad. But I'd like to say one more thing. Not everybody who holds a gun or a gun holster is an FSA. I mean, there's a state of lawlessness in Syria. There is no law. I mean, let's put things in perspective. Imagine New York City without electricity, water, or a police force for 3 days. Can you imagine the chaos? Homs has been under besiegement for 98 days until now. There's no cops on the streets. There's no law enforcement officers. You know the bad apples, the rats are gonna crawl out of the sewage system. To say that everybody that commits a crime is an FSA is outrageous. These people, the overwhelming majority, have been pleading with the international community for help for over 7 months. Even by Bashar Assad's, not last speech, the one before, he said that the armed resistance didn't even start until Ramadan of 2011, which is around, I don't know, July, August. These people had no other option but to protect themselves. I mean, it's a reality. It's very easy to label and condemn things when you're on the outside, but this is war. I mean, people make mistakes. Dick Cheney shot his friend in a hunting trip. This is a war. I mean, this is a real war. There's collateral damage. It's a given. So I don't like when people sit outside and label, oh, you know, it's rough. You know what? I think it's against human rights for people to watch a kid like Hamza al-Khatib get his penis cut off, his nipples electrocuted. Where's the world? Where's the reaction to this world? Now you're condemning a few thugs here and there. There's merchants of war. Look, if there's 1-2% bad apples in the Syrian society, these are now the ones that are getting the biggest coverage in the whole entire world. It's not fair.
He does make a good point. It's hard to cast judgment when you're not there in their shoes.
Right, but I'd like to just make a comment to the 47th. When we say it's war, let's make sure we categorize it correctly. This is the Assad regime waging war on its own people. Absolutely, it became militarized from the opposition side as a call for self-defense because nobody else was defending Syrians. In addition, I go back to this statement about defectors who refused to shoot at their fellow Syrians, especially when they stormed demonstrations and they saw that nobody was armed. Yeah. They were told they were fighting Islamist terrorists, and what they found instead was men, women, and children carrying flowers and water and signs.
Well, you're bringing up something that we've touched on briefly in the conversation, and I want to get more to it, and that's this idea of nonviolent resistance. Most people who've tried to do that in Syria have felt marginalized and have felt ignored as the death toll has risen. A little earlier today, we spoke with Osama, and she's a peace activist in Syria who questions the direction of the revolution. His face will also not be shown. Have a listen.
About protecting the civilians, since 1 year ago, the death toll was about 2,000 victims after about 6 months of peaceful revolution. Now we have more than 25,000 martyrs. So the statistics show that the arms do not really protect us, but at the contrary. Another thing, where these arms come from and why?
Fadi, I want to go to you. How realistic is the idea of a peaceful resistance given the landscape in Syria right now?
It started as a peaceful uprising and revolution. Let's keep that in mind. The idea was to attract the majority of the society and the population in Syria to a cause. That cause was dignity, freedom, and democracy. What's happening today is that there's a shift in that revolution. There's a shift, and somebody is taking it, instead of one for democracy, dignity, and freedom, into something as with this interference coming from outside, as well as the increased militarization, to a battle within on the geopolitical level, to a battle within Sunni and Shia grand war, to a battle of other things. So nobody rejects the fact that everybody has the right to defend themselves. This is a human right. However, while you carry on to attack and carry on attacks, that's a different story. the end does not justify the means. The cause of the Syrian people and the uprising is righteous, but that does not justify causing suffering, killing anybody, or creating any damage to the society or the fabric of the society or the country and the state itself. The FSA, if anything, should be held at a higher standard than that of the regime. After all, it's positioning itself as the anti-regime. So in that sense, it should be, everybody has the right and obligation to criticize and direct that, and even eliminate that fact of that factor, that section of the uprising, if it actually caused that uprising or this revolution goes somewhere that other than the actual objective that the revolution set, which is a free country with dignity and freedom and democracy.
Well, the 47th, I'd like to give two kind of opposing views from our community members. There's a tweet here from Ahmad who says, there are so-called rebels that don't protest or fight. They criticize both protesters and the FSA, yet they wish Assad was ousted. Then on the other hand, you have one from Omar Syria who says many are against FSA because anywhere they go, they bring with them regime shelling. People don't want them for fear of the regime. And one last one from Fatima who says FSA contains ex-members of the Syrian Army to defend the civilians, but Syrians themselves are now less willing to continue. Are you finding this? Are you finding Syrians who are weary with both sides?
Listen, what I find is as follows. I think that the neutral people in Syria have created a vacuum in which let other people fill it. Some of these people are maybe a little bit too violent. What I'm trying to say is as follows. Assad clearly followed what Lenin once said famously. He said, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. I remember in the beginning of the revolution, where Assad sent a few soldiers who pretended to be defectors in the middle of a demonstration. And then these defectors, presumably, they just turned around and started shooting at people. Listen, Assad soldiers are making barracks, they're making bases out of schools, hospitals, and then they're making the FSA look bad. This is a war zone. We're trying to defend ourselves. This is self-defense. We always condemn any human rights infringement, but help us. What we need is the world to realize what's happening is not fair. Nobody wanted an armed resistance in Syria. Nobody wanted to pick up arms. I just want to ask everybody here, what did the peaceful revolution get us? We got nothing out of the peaceful revolution. We stayed for a good 5-6 months peacefully. We got nothing but whole cities being shut down, besieged. It's not fair. What I think, a lot of people, especially in Aleppo, maybe got alienated because Aleppo stayed outside of the revolution for a good year and a half, like a year and 2 months. Now, I'd like to think about it as an unplanned pregnancy, all right? Should we abort? It's going on. It has to go on. We cannot stop. This regime does not understand but violence. I condemn violence. I condemn summary executions. But this regime understands only one language. Everybody knows it. You have to be from Syria to understand it. Actually, you have to be from the Arab world to understand it. This is my answer.
What if everyone is speaking the same language, and as the 47 says, it's a language of violence, is there any hope for the nonviolent movement?
Absolutely. Listen, if we want to transition to a peaceful, democratic country, we need to hold ourselves to higher standards. I will agree with Fadi on that. The FSA is serving a noble purpose. They should be held to a higher standard. So we want to the extent that we can, inform and educate people against sectarian violence and revenge killings.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you right there.
Oh.
We're going to pick it up in our online post show. So thanks to all of our guests. And we're coming up next at stream.aljazeera.com with more in this conversation. Now, Tuesday, we're going to ask the question, is political Islam facilitating or hindering aspirations for reform in the Middle East and North Africa? Professor Tariq Ramadan stops by the stream. We'll see you then. Welcome back to the Streams Online Post Show. We're still taking a look at who the Free Syrian Army is and why some pro-revolutionists don't support them. And Rafif, I want to pick up where we left off. We were talking about the possibility of continuing peaceful resistance.
Many people in many cities have said very clearly, we're not going anywhere. Certainly people are tired of being subjected to continuous shelling. Basically, every Syrian has lost a loved one. So to put it in context, imagine if cities in America could claim that every resident had lost a loved one. They are under tremendous pressure, and there is a humanitarian disaster. The fact that people continue is a testament not just to their courage, but to their desire to overthrow this regime. The people are speaking every day, whether they have picked up weapons in self-defense or they are going out in peaceful demonstrations. And I think the world needs to hear this appeal, not just from a humanitarian perspective, but also from a political perspective. The people have risen, they have spoken, and they continue to speak as we go into 18 months of regime-sponsored violence.
So the people have been speaking, and the world has bared witness to the bloodshed, yet the world hasn't stepped in a particularly meaningful way.
The world has failed Syrians, I believe. The world is happy to make excellent statements of condemnation. World leaders have used every superlative they can think of to condemn Bashar al-Assad, yet we're not seeing the kind of concrete action we need to put an end to basic human suffering. It is basic. I mean, this can be classified as genocide almost. The way the regime is responding not only to the armed opposition, but to civilians. When they fire on women and children lining up at bakeries, they are not fighting an armed opposition, they are fighting civilians. When they drop barrels full of TNT and other explosives on residential communities, the regime is waging war against its own people, and the world community needs to look at this and either take action or just admit that they're not interested in helping.
Well, I'd like to bring up a point that you raised a little bit earlier, and it's being reflected in these tweets I'm seeing. This one's from Farouk. And Fadi, I'll address this to you. Farouk says, there's always room for both an armed resistance and a peaceful one. They are not exclusive of each other. It's impossible. They say, I think they mean it's not impossible. But there's also a tweet from B Syria who says, an exclusively peaceful revolution would have been crushed a long time ago. Remember Hama, and of course that's a reference to the massacre in the 80s under Hafiz al-Assad. So what are your thoughts on that? Would an exclusively peaceful revolution be possible?
Yes, it would be possible, because every revolution in history thought that the regime or the whatever system it's fighting was more brutal than the other. Can we say that this regime is more brutal than Saddam Hussein? Was Saddam Hussein more brutal than Hitler? Whatever. It's the reality is the revolution, the peaceful revolution or the militarized revolution delegitimizes the peaceful one. You cannot really have both, because immediately you lose the legitimacy, the attraction, attracting the majority of the society, which eventually will be able to bring down a system or change its reality. Remember one more thing, the process that we take, the route that we take, and this is something we learn from history, the route that the people take will determine the outcome. So if you take a route that is peaceful, systematic, inclusive of everybody, you will probably reach a better state, which is the actual goal. People think that bringing down the regime is the goal. Well, bringing down the regime is actually a step towards the goal. It's not the final goal. And if we think about it, just by this limited view of bringing down the regime and then whatever comes, so be it, then we will end up with probably, and most likely, we can look at other alternatives or other examples around the world, we'll probably end up with the worst outcome. So
47th, I want you to jump in here and respond to what Fadi is saying, and then answer the question: where are the revolutionaries going? Where does this go next? If you bring down Assad, then what?
All right. Well, first of all, Saddam Hussein ended in a war in Iraq. It wasn't a peaceful revolution. More than 1 million Iraqis died in 2003, and it's still going on until now. We both know that in Hitler, it took World War II, millions of people dead. What peaceful revolution other than Edward Shevardnadze in 2003, the whatever they call it, the Jasmine Revolution in Georgia? This is a brutal regime. We both know, Fadi, you're a Syrian, I'm a Syrian. Assad will not... He's sending people to kill peaceful demonstrations. I don't understand how people sometimes think that we can sit on a table, talk to Assad, and he'll be like, oh, okay, you know what, I'm gonna leave. This is not the reality on the ground right here. Assad has killed thousands of people when nobody held guns yet. I know in Tel Kalakh, nearby my home city of Homs, he inserted some chemicals into water tanks. Next day, people of Tel Kalakh woke up with chronic diarrhea. This guy is not a guy who will say, I'm here to leave. This revolution, as far as I know, every single Syrian that I am in touch with, inside or outside, condemns human rights infringement. But what we would like is the help of everybody, including the international community, to get us rid of this person. This horrible tyrant is not the guy who will be like, I am leaving right now.
Rafeef, I know you wanted to jump in there.
I think there's a middle ground. Certainly, I can agree with a lot of what Fadi is saying. The way we conduct our revolution is a reflection of how Syria will be in the future. On the other hand, the 47th is making an excellent point. This is not a regime that's going to go through peaceful protest. And so I think to Farouk's tweet, there has to be a strong combination of civil resistance and targeted military action. And I think if we can support those FSA members that have signed the Code of Conduct, whose mission it is to protect civilians, we can successfully overthrow the regime and then transition to a democratic state. Of course, the transition afterwards is going to take a lot of hard work. We have to remember the psychological and physical effects this revolution has taken on the entire nation.
I'm going to hold it there. It's an excellent place to end the discussion. Thanks to all of our guests for joining us today. We do want to take a moment, though, to get to Malika, who has a few other leads that we're keeping an eye on.
Chicago teachers are on strike for the first time in 25 years over issues of pay and performance measures. While thousands took to the streets, many others took to the web, sending the hashtag #CTUStrike, in reference to the Chicago Teachers Union, to the top of the trending list on Twitter. The strike involves more than 25,000 employees and affects more than 400,000 students, but supporters say the action is necessary. The city won't agree to limit the number of kids in classrooms, Allison tweets, one reason Chicago teachers are striking. When I was a Chicago public school teacher, I routinely taught a class of 45 plus. It's not about the money, Aaron writes. But not everyone is sympathetic. Sarah tweets, once again, teachers' unions putting themselves before improving the quality of education for their students. Well, our next leads from India, where the arrest of a political cartoonist has sparked an outcry online. Asim Trivedi was jailed for drawings, including this one, focused on government corruption. Authorities deemed it insulting to the national emblem, which looks like this in its original form. Following his arrest, Asim Trivedi's name received nearly 10,000 mentions online, with supporters questioning why his actions led to jail. Others left messages of solidarity on the artist's Facebook page, like this one from Kumar Anubhav, who writes, if you're not going to use your free speech to criticize your own government, what's the point of having it? We'll continue to follow those stories and want to know what you think. So tweet us using the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, on Tuesday, is political Islam facilitating or hindering aspirations for reform in the Middle East and North Africa? Professor Tariq Ramadan stops by the stream to discuss his latest book, Islam and the Arab Awakening. Until then, we'll see you online.